Can you imagine being left behind in the desert? Just 8 years old, sick and alone. That's exactly what happened to Arlo Wynn, a fragile boy with a rare autoimmune disease, abandoned by his stepfather on a scorching summer day in 1986. But deep within the Siskiyou forest, something ancient was listening. What Arlo found wasn't a man. It wasn't a monster either. It was a presence, towering, gentle, and impossible. The Watcher. While the world saw Bigfoot as a myth, Arlo found a guardian who healed with silence and herbs, not words or violence. This story comes from a forgotten journal, once owned by a doctor who lost her own child to the same illness. She disappeared into the woods, until the forest brought Arlo to her doorstep. What followed was a fire, a choice, and a silent redemption. If you believe kindness still exists, even in the most unlikely forms, this is a story you need to witness. And before we dive deeper, where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to send a warm hello your way. The road stretched empty under the burning gold of a Siskiyou sunset. Dust rose like spirits behind the wheels of the old Ford pickup as it shuddered along the dirt track, its tailpipe coughing, tires worn raw. Cicadas hummed in the low brush. Somewhere overhead, a hawk carved wide circles in silence. Inside the truck, the cassette player buzzed with static. Then, beneath it, a voice emerged, warped, wavering, like it came from underwater, home where the heart still waits. The sound bled into the air, thin and frail. In the rearview mirror, Harlan Pike glanced at the boy slumped in the passenger seat, his small face pale, sticky with sweat, mouth slightly parted. Arlo Wynn, 8 years old, fever burning his temples. His lips moved. "Mom's singing," he murmured, eyes fluttering, lost between sleep and memory. "She's singing again." His arms clutched a half-shredded stuffed dog, threadbare and grimy from too many bad nights. Its ear was chewed clean off. Harlan looked away. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out the creased letter, folded 4 times, stained at the corners. Nora's handwriting sloped sharp and fast. "Take him to the Red Bluff Clinic. They'll know what to do. Please, please, just go there, not the Painted Hills." Harlan's eyes flicked to the road, and he took the next left, away from Red Bluff. The truck bumped over a dry cattle grate and disappeared toward Painted Hills. He didn't flinch. He didn't say a word. The horizon widened, the world flattening into rust-colored silence. Only the tires, the wind, and the dying song on the tape filled the cab now. Years ago, Harlan Pike had nearly drowned in a place like this. 10 years old, arms flailing in the floodwaters of Wolf Creek after a storm tore through their trailer park. He still remembered the pressure, water like fists pummeling his chest, how his lungs filled, how his body went slack. And then, something pulled him up. Not a hand exactly. It was too big, too rough. Coarse hair brushed his face, and a heat that didn't come from sun or fever wrapped around him. Then cold again, mud in his teeth. Flashlights, shouting, adults dragging him to shore. "What the hell were you thinking, boy?" "You saw what?" "That ain't real. There's nothing like that out here." They told him he was lucky. They told him he imagined it. He never forgot the smell. Damp fur, crushed pine, something older than rain. He buried that memory like a bone. Now he gripped the wheel tighter. The sun began to drop behind the ridge, bleeding across the horizon like an open wound. The road narrowed. Dry grass leaned in from both sides. A rabbit darted across the path and vanished. Harlan slowed the truck, pulled off the road onto a flat, open patch of cracked earth surrounded by gnarled trees. Distant hills blushed red in the dying light. He killed the engine. Silence crept in fast. Arlo stirred. "Where are we?" Harlan forced a smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Just stopping to get some firewood. Won't be long." The boy nodded. His voice came thin. "I'll stay, in case Mom calls." He tried to smile too. Harlan opened the door. The hinges groaned. He stepped out, boots hitting the dust, and walked toward the tree line. No axe, no bag, no intention of coming back. Behind him, the truck stayed still. Arlo curled up again in the seat, hugging the stuffed dog, eyes closing slowly. The heat still clung to the windows, and Harlan disappeared. Night fell all at once, like a switch thrown by an uncaring hand. The sky turned indigo. Stars blinked on, hesitant at first. The wind stirred the trees in long, low sighs. An owl called once, then went quiet. Arlo woke to silence. The cassette had ended. The dashboard lights were dim. His head ached. His lips cracked when he tried to speak. Mom? He pushed the door open. It creaked too loud. Dry air hit his face. He looked around. No firewood. No Harlan. Just the truck, the dark, the wind. He waited, counted. 10 seconds, 30, 100. Then came a sound, low and distant. Not footsteps, not a voice. A humming, deep, vibrating through the air like it rose up from the dirt itself. Like someone remembering a lullaby. The same one his mom used to sing. His knees buckled. He looked toward the woods. Nothing moved. But something was watching, and it was close. Far off, past the reach of the headlights, half hidden behind a slanting pine, something stood. It did not blink. It did not breathe like men do. But it watched the boy. Its eyes shimmered gold in the dark. That night, the moon climbed behind a veil of cloud, and the wind kept whispering through the trees. Harlan Pike never came back, and the humming never stopped. Morning would come eventually. But by then, the road would be cold and empty, and only tire tracks and small footprints would remain. The morning was silver, the kind of silver that doesn't shine, but floats, quiet and cold, between trees too tall for the sun to touch. Fog clung low, weaving through the undergrowth like it remembered a time before fire, before footsteps. Pines arched overhead like cathedral arches, holding back what little light tried to bleed in from the sky. And somewhere in that stillness, just beyond the hush of leaves brushing one another, something else breathed. Arlo Wynn moved slow, barefoot, scraped knees, denim stiff with sleep and dust, fever humming behind his eyes like a radio left on in the wrong room. He didn't know how long he'd been walking. Minutes, hours. He couldn't remember what time it was when he last heard the truck door slam. His arms ached from holding the stuffed dog tight. The shape of Harlan's face was fading in his mind, like breath on glass. He thought of his mom, thought of the way her hand rested on his forehead when the fevers got bad, thought of the way she sang, not loud, not full, just quietly under her breath while she folded towels or stirred soup. Now the wind sounded almost like her. Almost. He pulled the wrinkled piece of paper from his back pocket, the one she'd drawn for him in green ink. A wobbly map, a winding river, 3 trees with smiley faces. "Follow the stream," she'd said. "If anything ever happens, follow the stream. You'll find people." But this stream wasn't on the map. Or maybe it was, and the map was wrong. The water ran cold and fast, tumbling over pebbles and roots, whispering secrets in a language he almost understood. He stumbled. The ground shifted beneath him. His foot slid on moss. He fell hard, palms scraping stone, elbows jolting. Pain shot through his knees, and then the burn. Wet, red, raw. The sky tilted. The trees swam. He lay there, chest rising, falling, rising again. Then nothing. Just dark. And the soft sound of water nearby. And maybe something else moving too. When he woke, the world was dim and made of stone. He blinked up at a ceiling that wasn't a ceiling at all. Just the curve of earth and rock above him. Split where sunlight poured through a narrow crack, painting a line across the floor like the edge of a blade. Everything smelled of damp earth and something sharp, almost minty. His body lay on something soft and rough. He turned his head. Deer hide, worn smooth in some places, still coarse in others. His lips parted. No sound came. Next to him was a hollowed-out bamboo stalk, capped with moss. Water, clean, cold. He lifted it with trembling hands and drank. His throat burned, then soothed. Beside it lay a flat piece of dark stone, mottled green from age. Crushed leaves rested there, mashed to paste with a small stick, like someone had made medicine the old way. Leaves he didn't recognize. The smell stung his nose but didn't hurt. It reminded him of the time his mom tried to boil eucalyptus when he had a cough. He sat up slowly. The pain in his legs flared, but it wasn't as sharp as before. Someone had wrapped a strip of something soft, maybe linen, maybe bark, around his knee. His heart thudded. He wasn't alone. Or he hadn't been. The air still held warmth, like a fire had been there. Or someone. He looked around. No footsteps, no voices. But still, he could feel it. Something had been close, and not just that. Something still was. He pressed a hand to his chest, and then he heard it again, that sound. The humming, not loud, not musical, just steady. A single note carried through the air like fog, like breath, like a hand on his back when no one's there. It didn't come from outside. It didn't come from inside either. It came from somewhere else, somewhere in between. He lay back down, closed his eyes, placed his hand flat on his rib cage. His pulse tapped beneath his fingers. Soft, unsteady. And then slowly, it fell into rhythm with the sound. Like two hearts sinking. Not his and someone else's, but his and the world's. His and whatever it was that had found him, lifted him, carried him here. His lips moved, not a whisper, just a thought. Are you there? The humming continued, not answering, but not gone. Outside the mouth of the cave, the forest breathed again. Mist curled along the edges of the rock. Ferns dipped under their own weight. And barely visible through the haze, a figure stood, massive, still, bent slightly at the neck, like in prayer. Not a threat, not a monster, but something older than fear. Watching, listening, keeping the boy safe, if only for a little while longer. Because night would come again, and the world was not kind, not always, but maybe, sometimes. It remembered how to be. Somewhere beneath the ribs of the forest, where moss clung thick to fallen trunks and the air carried the scent of lichen and pine sap, a blade of late afternoon light cut through the canopy and struck the side of a weathered wooden cabin. It sat on a slight slope above a narrow stream, framed by a half-ring of aspen and pine, their leaves turning pale at the tips as fall crept in quiet and slow. The windows were open. The curtains moved like someone breathing. A wind chime made of pine cones and river glass clacked softly, counting the seconds that passed without incident. Inside, Mara Keats knelt beside a mason jar filled with tiny yellow blossoms, fingering their stems with slow, practiced movements. Goldenrod, yarrow, wild daisy, and a few crushed petals of purple thistle. The table was cluttered with half-written notes, dog-eared field guides, dried bark curled like ribbon, and a chipped teacup that still held steam. She had a pencil tucked behind her ear, dirt beneath her nails, and a weariness in her bones that didn't come from the day's work. She hadn't spoken aloud in 4 days. Her boots leaned beside the door. Her coat hung on a rusted nail. On the shelf above her stove were 2 picture frames turned face down. She never looked at them anymore. She preferred it that way. The sun had begun to lower itself behind the ridge when she heard it. First the crows, agitated, bursting from the trees in a fury of black feathers and cawing. Then the silence, heavier than before. Then the sound she hadn't heard in months. Footsteps, but not the kind that crunched gravel or snapped twigs. Softer, bare, staggered. She looked up, eyes narrowing. Not a deer, not a bear. She grabbed her canvas pack and slid the small blade she used for bark cutting into the side pocket. Not for defense, just for habit. She stepped out into the light, scanning the tree line. Nothing. She walked slowly, the way she'd learned to walk after leaving the city. You don't rush the forest. You wait for it to tell you the truth. And then she saw them. Tracks. Small. Human. She knelt, brushing her fingers through the indentations, and frowned. Too small for a teen, too narrow for an adult. But next to them, something else. Something wider, deeper, pads instead of soles, no shoe tread. No human ever walked like that. Her breath hitched. She stood, and then ran, upstream, fast. Pack bouncing against her back, braid slapping against her jacket. The air turned cooler. She passed the old oak bent sideways by lightning and the stone marker her daughter once pretended was a dragon's tooth. Her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. Then, by the bend in the stream, she saw the color. Blue denim, a child's leg. Still, she dropped to her knees. A boy, maybe 8, pale as death. Lips cracked, skin hot, head lolled to the side. One arm curled under his body like he'd fallen mid-step, the other clutching something soft and shredded. A stuffed animal, dirt-caked and torn at the seams. "Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" No answer. She touched his forehead. Burning, then his pulse. Too soft, too slow. She froze. Not out of shock, out of memory. There had been another time. Another child. A hospital bed. A mother's hand reaching through wires and beeping in sterile air, trying to hold on to something already slipping. Her daughter's last fever had felt exactly like this, and it had taken her. But not this one. No, not today. She lifted him, slowly, cradling his body against her chest, tucking his legs under her arms, securing the stuffed toy between his elbow and hers. He weighed almost nothing. His breath rasped against her collarbone, and she walked. Back through the trees, back to the cabin. She laid him on the cot by the window, threw open the trunk at the foot of the bed, pulled out the old flannel blanket her sister had sent last winter, and the jar of feverfew she'd almost forgotten she had. She ground it fast, mixed it with crushed yarrow and willow bark, spooned in a little honey, and stirred until the scent turned bitter and right. She tilted his chin, poured carefully. He coughed, sputtered, swallowed. She watched his eyelids flutter. Not awake, but closer. The fever might break, or it might not. She moved to the fire, stoked it higher, boiled water, wiped his face, set the stuffed dog beside him. Then she sat back in the rocking chair in the corner, rested her elbows on her knees, and stared. The boy didn't look like he belonged here, but neither did she. Not anymore. Not since Portland. Not since the ward. Not since the last breath that left her daughter's chest and took something from her that nothing else had managed to give back. Outside, the wind began to shift. A howl, high and fast, arced across the trees like a ghost crying for its skin. Mara stood again, turned off the gas, listened. And there it was. A sound too heavy to be a deer, too measured to be a bear. Footsteps, circling, not rushing, not hunting. Just there. She stepped to the window and peeled the curtain aside an inch. At first she saw nothing. Then, movement. A shadow between trees. A shape. Tall. Too tall. Covered in something dark. Hair, maybe fur. Hard to tell in the mist. The moon was only half out, casting cold light across the clearing. The shape stopped, stood still. And from this distance, 30, maybe 40 feet, she saw the eyes. Amber, not glowing, but bright, alive. And not angry, not wild, just heavy, with something she couldn't name. She didn't breathe. The thing didn't move. Then it turned, stepped back into the mist. Gone. Mara didn't close the curtain, didn't speak. She stepped back from the window, heart hammering like it had the first time she held a scalpel in her hand and prayed not to slip. She stood in the stillness and tried not to believe what she had just seen. But she had, and it had seen her too. That night, sleep came like a thief with a limp, late and uneasy. The boy muttered in dreams, the fever making him twitch and call out for someone named Nora. His mother, maybe. Mara dipped a cloth again, ran it across his brow, felt the heat still lingering, though not as fierce. Then, as she returned to her chair, she noticed something. By the door, the floor, mud. Not hers, a single footprint, too wide, too deep. No shoe tread, just the shape of something massive, a footprint that hadn't been there before. And beside it, a bundle, dried moss, chopped root, and a stalk of wild foxtail tied with a twist of bark. Exactly the ingredients she had run out of. Exactly what she needed to bring down swelling. She knelt, touched it, still damp from the ground, still warm, not just delivered, offered, not a threat, not a warning, just left. For her, for the boy, from something or someone who was listening, watching, understanding in a way humans never quite could. She looked back at the window. The curtain still stirred, and outside, the forest didn't sleep. The moon hung in pieces that night, half lit, smeared in thin cloud like chalk rubbed over glass. Wind slid through the trees in slow spirals, teasing branches, rustling the edge of the metal roof. Something about the silence felt crooked, the kind that settles before something breaks. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to orange breath. Shadows leaned long on the floorboards, pooling at the corners. The teacup on the nightstand trembled a little, almost like something had passed by it, though the air never shifted. Mara Keats opened her eyes. The cot beside her was empty. For a second, her mind refused to believe it. Maybe he just turned over. Maybe the blanket had slipped. Maybe she hadn't even fallen asleep that deep. Maybe he was still there. But no. The covers were peeled back. The window was open. And the curtain was still moving. A soft ripple like something had just exited. Not long ago. Her stomach tightened. She rose without a word, barefoot, steady. Years of training had taught her not to shout in panic. She pulled on her boots without lacing them, grabbed her coat from the nail, and slipped the flashlight into one pocket. Outside, the wind had teeth. She followed instinct first. Then the sound. Then the barest smear of soft footfalls leading toward the rise behind the cabin. The earth was cold under her soles. Leaves stuck to the edges of her coat. Somewhere to her left, an owl called low and sharp. But her eyes were already on him. Arlo, sitting on a flat rock near the clearing edge, his knees drawn to his chest, hair mussed with sleep and fog, staring out into the trees like he'd always been there. He didn't move when she approached, didn't flinch. She slowed her steps, heart still loud in her ears. "Arlo," she said quietly, not too close yet. He didn't look back. "He listens," the boy whispered. "To who?" "To me, when I'm afraid." Mara stepped closer. His voice wasn't scared. It was content, as if he had woken from a better dream and walked into a place where dreams didn't need to end. The clearing opened just beyond him, and beyond that, shadows again, but not empty. Her breath stopped mid-throat. She saw it. Tall, at least 8 feet, covered in dark fur matted with mist and dew, standing just at the edge of moonlight, framed by the silhouettes of trees that seemed to bend slightly toward it. Its eyes glowed a muted gold, not bright, not menacing, just watching. Mara's hands curled into fists, not from fear, from awe. The boy was looking at the same thing. The figure didn't move, didn't retreat. Arlo's hand pointed. "He was there when I was cold, when I was lost. He hummed so I wouldn't feel scared." Mara opened her mouth, closed it. The forest around them felt suspended in some held breath. Then the figure raised one arm, not sudden, not threatening, and placed something on the ground, then lowered its head, a gesture of offering. Then, just like before, without any sound of branch or brush, the figure stepped back into the fog, and the fog accepted it like it had never existed. Mara moved forward, legs trembling now, each step a silent apology to the moment for touching it. At the edge where the shape had stood was a bundle. Foxtail grass, dry root bark, a curled clump of moss tied in thin strips of pine. Anti-inflammatory, cooling agent, natural antibiotic. Her fingers shook. She knelt. Whoever, whatever that was, had given her exactly what she'd been looking for. The same formula she'd scribbled in a note the day before, half out of desperation, half out of memory, but no one else knew. No one had seen that paper. She turned back to the boy. He was staring at her, eyes calm. "He helps, but only if you listen." She swallowed. "How do you know that?" "I just do." The wind picked up again. Pine needles rattled against the metal gutters of the cabin. Mara stood, bundle in hand, and they both walked back together. She didn't ask more. She didn't have to. Some knowledge comes like a memory you forgot was yours. That night she stayed by the fire, notebook in lap, pencil unmoving. She flipped through an older journal, the one with the dog-eared pages, the one she hadn't opened in years. Inside, the script was worn but clear. Notes from her mentor, a man named Bernard McQuaid. He'd taught her herbal theory during her internship in Bend before she ever saw her first hospital ward. He was part scientist, part mystic, part hermit. She hadn't thought of him in a decade. Page after page of field notes, medicinal breakdowns, but then, one margin note, in faded ink, almost like a confession. The Watcher helps those who listen to the forest, not those who try to own it. The Watcher. She stared at the words so long her eyes blurred. Outside, the wind softened. She closed the journal, walked to the window. The boy still slept. The night didn't, and neither did she. Because something had shifted. Not just in the trees, not just in the boy, but in her. And when a creature that shouldn't exist places medicine at your feet, lowers its head, and walks away, you start to believe the world is wilder than you let it be. And maybe, just maybe, that's the beginning of healing, even for people like her. Especially for people like her. The curtain moved again, and somewhere, far off, so faint it could have been wind, the humming returned. Low, warm, like a song without words, still unfinished. The forest had shifted colors. The last greens of summer were bleeding into fire, rusted red, brittle orange, scorched gold. Leaves curled at the edges like pages in a book left too close to heat. The air smelled like dry wood and copper. And something else underneath. The way metal smells when it's just been unholstered. Far down the main road from Hope Ridge, a rust-bitten Chevy pickup growled its way up a trail it didn't belong on anymore. Tires chewed the loose gravel with something close to vengeance. Harlan Pike lit a cigarette with hands that had stopped shaking days ago. He told himself he came back for closure, for answers, for the boy, for Nora. But he also brought the Remington, and the half-empty bottle of wild turkey in the glove box said otherwise. He hadn't touched the letter since the day he ditched the kid. Didn't need to. He knew what it said. He knew what he'd done. But something had clawed at him in the weeks that followed. Not guilt. He didn't believe in that anymore. It was something older, something colder. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that goddamn shadow again. That shape he'd told himself was just a fever dream from childhood. The one the river should have drowned. The one the adults had laughed off. The one that had lived rent-free in the back of his skull for 30 years. He told himself the boy wouldn't last a night. That nature would take care of things. But the headlines didn't match. Local woman claims missing boy seen near forest line. Sheriff declines comment. Rumors of barefoot child sighted west of Painted Hills. Unconfirmed. Then yesterday, a tip from someone at a gas station. Little kid, dusty face, had a limp, asked about someone named Mara. Seemed okay, real polite. Harlan stared into the mirror. If the kid was alive, it meant something else was too. And if that something was real, he had to finish it. He parked just off the bend where the tree line thickened, slung the rifle over his shoulder, took one last swig, spat, and stepped into the woods. The deeper he walked, the more the world started pressing in. Branches leaned lower, shadows lengthened. No wind, no birds, just silence. And the sound of his own boots crushing pine needles like bones. He didn't know how long he walked. Time felt thick, like mud. Then, movement. Something big, past the ridge. Not a bear, not a man. He raised the rifle. His breath caught. There, between two black firs. It wasn't just tall, it was massive. Covered in fur, matted with dirt and leaf bits. Shoulders wider than a door frame. Arms longer than natural. The thing turned slightly. just enough for him to see its face. Not animal, not human, but something in between. Its eyes met his, amber, wide, deep. Then he fired. The shot rang out like a punch to the sky. The figure staggered. The bullet clipped something, then hit a branch high above. Harlan's fingers froze. A crack. A branch gave way. And below it, a boy's scream. "Arlo!" Harlan's voice broke without warning. He ran. No thought, just legs. Just the memory of a fevered child in his passenger seat. Just the voice that said, "I'll stay here so Mom won't worry." The boy was crouched at the base of the tree. A limb, thick and heavy, was falling fast. But the thing, the watcher, it moved first. Lunged. Its body threw itself between the boy and the crushing weight. Wood splintered. Bark flew. It hit the ground with a sound that shook Harlan's chest. Then silence again. Arlo was untouched. The creature lay half-curled, one arm up, blood oozing slow and thick from the shoulder. Red on black fur. Steam rising. Not dead, but hurt. It looked up, right at Harlan. And Harlan saw it again. Not the beast, not the monster, but the eyes. Those same eyes from the river. The same eyes that pulled him from death. The same eyes he'd spent a lifetime denying. He dropped the rifle. It hit the dirt with a dull final sound. His mouth opened. He whispered, hoarse, "You're real." The watcher didn't move, didn't blink. Just lay there, breathing shallow. You saved me," Harlan said, like the words had waited decades to be spoken. "You saved me once." The boy looked up at him, confused. Mara came crashing through the brush seconds later, heart hammering like a drum. Saw the rifle, saw Harlan, saw the bleeding fur, and something in her changed too. But no one screamed, no one moved. Even the forest seemed to wait. And in the stillness, something passed between the man, the creature, and the boy. Not language, something older. Like forgiveness not yet given. Like understanding not yet named. Harlan took a step back, then another, then turned, and disappeared into the trees. No words, no apologies, but something left behind. The boy touched the creature's hand. Warm, still alive, and for the first time in a long time, no one ran. The forest didn't push them away. It held them there, in a moment neither fear nor reason could explain. And above them, the wind began to move again. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to carry the sound of humming. Faint, but still there, still present, still watching. It started with a sound so small, no one noticed. Not at first, just the hiss of dry grass waking to fire. A quiet crack like twigs shifting under weight. But then the smell came, acrid, sharp, the kind that slices into your lungs and doesn't leave. Smoke slithered between the trees like it was hunting something. Or someone. Mara looked up from the herbal paste she was grinding. Something felt off, not just in the air, but in the light. The amber outside had turned mean, thicker, slower. She walked to the window and saw it, the edge of the sky bruising red, not from sunset, but from something rising. Her eyes narrowed. Smoke, not from the hearth, not from town. It was coming from the south ridge, coming fast. Inside, the cabin shifted. Arlo lay curled on the cot, arm draped over his stuffed dog. He stirred, coughing lightly. "Stay there," Mara whispered, but her voice caught in her throat. She stepped onto the porch. The wind slapped her hard, dry, hot, and urgent. And then she heard it. The crack. A tree snapping somewhere too close. Then the roar. Low at first, like thunder behind a wall. Then climbing, then screaming. The forest was burning. It wasn't a campfire or a brush spark. It was something else. Something ravenous. It was already in the lower canopy, leaping like it had legs. She turned fast, heart slamming against her ribs. "Arlo, get up!" The boy blinked awake, dazed. "Put on your shoes. We need to go now." He sat up, still slow, still aching. But he moved. She grabbed the emergency pack, tossed in the salve and whatever water she could grab. Outside, the sky dimmed even as the fire brightened it from below. The trees had gone dark against the glow, like bones against flame. Then the first ember landed on the porch. Still glowing, still hungry. She stomped it out, eyes darting toward the stable. "Sable," she muttered. Arlo followed her gaze. The horse, still tied. They ran. The brush along the path was already lit. Flames licking up from ground cover, chewing bark like sugar. Mara covered Arlo's mouth with a damp cloth. She didn't say it aloud, but they had minutes. Maybe. They reached the stable. The horse kicked wildly against the stall, eyes wide with panic. "Shh, easy girl. It's us." Mara threw the door open and Sable bucked back. Arlo didn't hesitate. He stepped into the stall, whispered something soft, something broken and gentle, and laid his small hand on the horse's neck. It worked. She calmed just enough for Mara to grab the reins. But the fire was louder now, closer, and the path they came from was already blocked. Mara looked east. The only way out was down the ravine and across the riverbed. It would be rough, but it wasn't flame. Yet. She turned toward Arlo. "Climb up." He hesitated. "You'll ride with her?" "What about you?" "I'll hold the reins. She can pull both of us." But no time. The roar behind them shifted again. No longer a sound. Now a presence. A living thing made of breath and ash and heat. She boosted him up, then grabbed the saddle horn with one hand and pulled herself alongside. Smoke burned her eyes. Tears blurred everything. Then something crashed behind them. A tree, splintering, and fire opened its mouth to scream. Then the window shattered. Not from heat, from impact. A shape exploded through the edge of the stable wall, shoving aside the burning beam. The watcher, scorched fur, burned skin, bleeding shoulder. It didn't pause. It grabbed the saddle from behind, fingers wrapped around the leather, and pulled. Mara gasped, but it wasn't attacking. It was lifting, guiding, leading them forward. One step, two, then running. The horse screamed and kicked into gear, hooves pounding against dry dirt. And the three of them, beast, woman, boy, moved as one. Flames on both sides, trees folding in, sparks like fireflies around them. Arlo buried his head into the horse's mane. Mara looked back once. The watcher was still pushing, one hand on the saddle, the other clearing debris with brute force, as if its own body was immune to pain. And in that moment, the wind changed. It turned. It fed the fire a new direction. But not before they broke through. The forest opened wide. Smoke poured into the clearing. And they were out. Burning sky behind them. Ash raining down like confetti in hell. Mara turned the horse toward the river. The watcher let go. He slowed. Stopped. And for the first time, she saw him fully. Not just his size. Not just the wildness. But the sorrow. He was swaying. The burn on his arm still bleeding. His chest rising too slow. She stepped down, but he lifted a hand. Not in warning. In farewell. Then behind him, two more shapes emerged. Taller even. One broader. The other thinner. Same fur. Same silence. Watching. Waiting. She blinked. But they didn't vanish. They stayed. And then the watcher turned toward them, nodded once, and limped into the mist. Arlo climbed down too. He stood beside Mara, hands still trembling from the ride. Will he be okay? She didn't answer right away. The sky above them was gray with ash. The cabin was gone. The ridge would smoke for days. But something told her he'd make it. Somehow. He's not alone, she said finally. Arlo looked up. Neither of them moved. The forest hadn't gone quiet. Not this time, because somewhere beyond the scorched tree line, someone was still humming, just beneath the sound of the wind. The smoke hadn't cleared. Not really. It never does. Even when the fire is gone and the trees stop crackling, the scent of it lingers, buried in the soil, sunk into the bark, folded between the layers of memory that make a place feel holy or haunted. And Hope Ridge felt like both. From a distance, it looked like winter had arrived early. The ridgeline was ghost pale with ash. Trees that had once held gold and red leaves now stood stripped, scorched, some leaning, others blackened at the roots. The fire had taken the cabin, the shed, the field of wild aster behind the porch. But it had not taken them. It hadn't taken Arlo. It hadn't taken Mara. And it hadn't taken the thing they still didn't have a name for, but now carried inside them like a breath they could never quite exhale. It had been 3 weeks, long enough for the Forest Service to finish their report, for the sheriff's office to dig out their files, for the court to reopen what it had once closed. Harlan Pike had been found just outside County Line Road, shirt torn, unarmed, staring at a tree like it had something to say. When the deputy called his name, he didn't run. He didn't flinch. He just handed over the keys to the truck and muttered, "I need to talk to someone about the boy." They didn't let him. Not right away. The charges were enough to hold him. Child endangerment, unlawful discharge of a firearm, suspected arson. But he never protested, never raised his voice, never asked for a lawyer. All he did was sit with his hands folded, like a man finally ready to tell the truth, and no longer sure it would change anything. When Nora came, it wasn't with anger. It wasn't with fire in her eyes or vengeance in her voice. It was with hands that trembled and eyes that had run out of tears somewhere around day 7. She walked into the visitation room like someone stepping back into a dream they had no control over. She sat down across from Harlan, looked at him for a long moment, then placed a cassette tape on the table between them. He didn't touch it. She didn't explain. "I found it in your glove box," she said softly. "Still works. His voice is on it." He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "He listened to it every night, even after you left him." "I know," Harlan whispered. She stood then, but not before sliding the envelope toward him. The edges were frayed. Inside was a photo. Arlo at maybe 4 years old, wearing a Halloween costume with crooked stitching and missing teeth in his grin. "You don't get to have him," she said, "but maybe you get to remember." He didn't say another word, just stared at the boy in the picture like he was trying to memorize something he'd already lost. Back on the ridge, winter arrived early in ways that didn't involve weather. Mara had started rebuilding. Not the house, not yet. But the patterns. She raked soil, she pulled stone, she cleared space for something new. Arlo helped when he could. His hands were stronger now, his legs steadier. The pain that once curled him up at night had started to dull. Not gone, but no longer the anchor it used to be. Mara's tinctures had changed too. She worked with more than memory now, more than books, something deeper. Something learned from what had been left on her porch in silence, from what she had been shown in the fog. She'd started drying foxtail in rows, spreading yarrow in woven trays. She found herself speaking to the herbs now, thanking them out loud, the way her grandmother once did when she thought no one was listening. She hadn't returned to town. Didn't need to. Word had spread anyway. A woman doctor who had once stitched the dying now tended the living with roots and bark and breath. Some called her witch, others healer. Arlo just called her Mara. That was enough. One morning the mailbox, blackened and half bent, held a small padded envelope addressed in a familiar hand. She opened it slowly, standing by the stump where the porch used to be. Inside was a cassette tape and a letter. Not long, just a few lines. "He never aged. I saw him again. You were right not to run. Keep the tape. He belongs to your world now, not mine. H." She read it twice, then slid the tape into the recorder on the kitchen counter salvaged from the fire. Static. Then music. Then the soft warble of Nora's voice. Home, where the heart still waits. Mara closed her eyes. Let it play. Outside, Arlo was painting. The canvas was small, maybe 9x12, set up on the easel near the edge of the ridge. He hadn't said what it would be, just that he needed the light. He dipped his brush into the yellow, then red, then a streak of dark green. When he stepped back, he didn't smile. He didn't explain. He just stared at it. It was a hand, massive, open, and beneath it, a small figure of a boy, reaching up, not in fear, but in trust. Above them, The light cut through trees in rays like strings pulled by something divine. The kind of light you only get right before dusk. The kind that makes everything feel like it might be forgiven, if just for a moment. Mara stepped behind him, rested a hand on his shoulder. "He dreamed about this," he said. "You saw it in a dream?" "No," Arlo said. "He did." The two of them stayed like that for a while. Sable snorted softly in the distance. The wind moved through the ash like it was trying to remember how to sing. And just past the tree line, far enough that you could miss it if you weren't paying attention, something moved. Not loud, not fast, but real. Between two trees that had somehow survived the fire, blackened at the roots, but still standing, a shape lingered. Tall, still, watching. The watcher. Not approaching, not retreating. Just being. And the moment stretched, the air bent slightly. Then the wind carried something across the ridge. Low, gentle, a sound. Not words, not song, but something like humming. Familiar, unmistakable. Mara didn't speak. Arlo didn't move. Because sometimes, when something sacred enters the room, all you can do is be still. Let it pass through you. Let it mark you. And then let it go. But even when it's gone, it stays. It always stays. Spring came without warning. No trumpet of thunder, no storm to announce itself. Just the slow melt of frost in the roots, and the kind of light that made everything ache a little more gently. The pines, burned but unbroken, stretched green again at the tips. Wild garlic pushed up through ash. Ferns unfurled like old scrolls. The fire hadn't taken everything. Some things return when no one's looking. On the ridge, the cabin had not yet been rebuilt, but life had. Where the porch once stood, there was now a long bench made from a split cedar log, polished smooth with hands and rain. Along the path to the creek, rows of herbal beds ran wild with local plants. Chicory, dandelion, bee balm, foxglove. Not manicured, not neat, alive. That was enough. And in the clearing, under a young pine that had somehow survived both lightning and flame, a hand-painted sign swayed gently in the breeze. Hope Ridge Clinic. Natural care by hand and heart. Inside the modest outbuilding that served as a workspace, Nora packed vials with a steadiness that surprised even her. She labeled each one in a soft cursive that had once belonged to grocery lists and birthday cards. Now it labeled tinctures and salves. She had come to help only temporarily. That was the plan. But plans meant very little in a place like this. Here, everything happened slower, but deeper. And so she stayed. Not because she forgot what happened, but because she remembered. And remembered right. Arlo sat just beyond the tree line, legs crossed, sketch pad on his knees. His hands no longer shook. The pencils no longer slipped. He drew for hours without speaking, not for praise, not for escape, but because something in him had words that didn't work out loud. The doctors back in town had called it remission, but Mara didn't say that word. She said healing. She said rhythm. She said trust, and the boy trusted her. He trusted the way she placed her hand on his back when he coughed. He trusted the warmth in her voice when she reminded him to drink the tea that tasted like wet leaves. He trusted the way she never lied. Not even the small lies people tell kids to keep them calm. When she said, "It's okay to be afraid," she meant it. When she said, "The pain will pass," she meant it would pass. Not that it would vanish. He trusted her when she said, "What you saw was real. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to defend it. You just have to live with it." And he did. So did she. Mara walked barefoot now, most days. Said it helped her feel when the ground changed beneath her. Said the body could sense when something ancient was moving underfoot. If we stopped wearing rubber soles and started listening again. Some of the townspeople called her strange. Others called her brave. She didn't care which name stuck. She had work to do and a boy to raise. That morning, Arlo finished a new drawing. It was different from the others. Not the watcher, not the forest, not the fire. This one was a wide hand, palm up, beneath a shaft of morning light. In the center of the hand stood a tiny figure of a boy. No face, no features, just the outline of a child held gently in something much older, much stronger, and not at all afraid. He showed it to Mara. She looked at it for a long time, then nodded, then didn't say a word. Because sometimes words undo things better left whole. Later, just after lunch, Mara took him to the ridge. They walked slowly, the way you do when the air is too perfect to waste. The ridge looked different now, more open, more honest. They sat on the edge, legs dangling. Below them, wildflowers were coming back in soft, patient waves. He pointed to a patch of purple. "What's that one?" "Self-heal," she said. "Good for fever or bruising. It smells like mint." "It is mint," she smiled, and they just sat there, not counting time, not waiting for anything, just being. Then Arlo turned his head toward the woods and paused. At first he said nothing. Then, "Do you hear that?" Mara tilted her head. Wind in the pine branches, the faint rattle of needles, a far-off flick of water against rock. And underneath it, yes, a hum. Not loud, not close, but there. She nodded. "I do." They didn't look for it. They didn't need to. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a haunting. It was a memory made real again. A voice without a mouth. A presence without a demand. Just a reminder. That goodness still walked the tree line. That some hands save you without ever needing to hold you. And just as the breeze swept the wild grass in slow, dancing arcs, Arlo took his mother's hand and squeezed once. She squeezed back. Not tightly. Not in fear. Just enough. Just enough to say, "I know." Down below, the wildflowers kept blooming. And in the shadow of 2 tall pines, if you watched long enough, if you believed just enough, you could see the edge of something shift. Not a man. Not a ghost. Something in between. Still, listening, as the last light broke through the trees. Sometimes the quietest stories leave the deepest echoes. The ones carved not in headlines or legends, but in soil, in silence, in the way someone learns to breathe again after the world has gone cold. There are places in this world where answers never come in words, where healing doesn't look like triumph, but like survival with gentleness. Places where truth doesn't shout, it waits, in the trees, in the wind, in the soft space between memory and forgiveness. Some wounds don't vanish. They change shape. They find rhythm in a new life, a slower life, where the pain doesn't own you, but it hums in the background, asking only to be honored, not erased. And sometimes, when you're lucky, the world answers back. Not with miracles that rewrite everything, but with quiet hands that steady you. With moss where you thought there'd be nothing. With someone, something, standing nearby, not to fix you, but to remind you that you were never truly alone. There are forces older than fear, older than fire. And there is a kind of strength that doesn't roar, doesn't conquer, it shelters, it endures, it listens. And maybe that's the lesson. Not all protectors wear faces we recognize. Not all acts of love look like rescue. Sometimes they look like silence held beside pain. Sometimes they look like letting go. Sometimes they're just the sound of the forest humming when everything else has gone quiet. If you've ever been lost, if you've ever held your breath hoping something, someone would show up in the dark and simply sit with you, then maybe you already understand. Some stories end without a full circle. Some just leave the path open. And sometimes that's exactly enough. Thank you for spending time with this story. If it moved you in any way, if it stirred something you didn't know had a name, we'd be honored to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and share how the story resonated with you. And if you believe in stories that whisper rather than scream, stories that carry heart and breath and a little bit of mystery, consider subscribing and joining us for the next one. Your presence here matters. Truly. We'll see you beneath the pines.